Welcome Back to History. To celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, I have prepared a video covering the 5 longest reigning monarchs in British history. If you like these kind of videos, please hit the thumbs up button and don't forget to subscribe. Now on to the chart. Henry III was born on October 1, 1207 in Winchester Castle to his parents King John and his mother Isabella, Countess of Angoulême. Henry became King of England at only 9 years old in the middle of the First Barons' War. Since he was a minor, he had 2 regents, William Marshal, 1st Earl of Pembroke from 1216 to 1219 and from 1219 to 1227 Hubert de Burgh. In 1230, Henry attempted to reconquer the French provinces that once belonged to his father, but that plan ended up being a mess. Following a revolt led by his earlier regent's son, Richard Marshal, in 1232, Henry decided to rule England personally rather than governing through his senior ministers. He married Eleanor of Provence, with whom he had 5 children. He traveled less compared to other monarchs, investing his money in palaces and castles. He held lavish religious ceremonies and gave generous sums to charity. He adopted Edward the Confessor, an Anglo-Saxon king who reigned 200 years prior, as his heavenly protector. Another plot to take over his family lands in France was started in 1242, which ended in the disastrous Battle of Taillebourg. His reign was getting increasingly unpopular by 1258. Henry and his son, the later Edward I, were defeated at the Battle of Leves and were imprisoned. Edward managed to escape and to defeat the force behind the battle, Simon de Montfort, and to free his father later. Henry died in 1272 after 56 years on the throne. His reign was the longest in medieval English history. James Charles Stuart, how his full name was born on June 19, 1566, to his mother Mary, Queen of Scots, and his father Henry Stuart. He succeeded his mother to the Scottish throne when she was compelled to abdicate in his favor on July 24, 1567, when James was only 1 year old. By the time his minority ended in 1578, James had 4 different regents. James was lured into imprisonment in 1582 by the Protestant Earls of Derby and Angus in a plot to reform the government, but that failed and James was liberated in 1583. From 1584 to 1603, James established an effective royal government and relative peace among the lords. James married Anne of Denmark, daughter of Frederick II of Denmark, in 1589. They went on to have 7 children, but only 3 of them survived to adulthood. Anne died in 1619. Over in England, Queen Elizabeth I died in 1603 without any heirs, making James her most likely successor. He was proclaimed King of England and Ireland on the same day, uniting the crowns of England, Ireland, and Scotland. But note that both kingdoms remained individual, sovereign states with own parliaments, laws, and so on. They just shared the same monarch. After being on the throne for 57 years, James's reign was the longest of any Scottish monarch. During this time, he was most successful in Scotland while facing difficulties in England. He was succeeded by his son Charles, who lost his head in the English Civil War. George III was the first monarch of the House of Hanover to be born in Britain. After his father's death, he became heir to the British throne. He succeeded his grandfather George II in 1760. He also inherited the title of Elector of Hanover, although he never visited Hanover. During his reign, Britain won the 7 Years' War against France and thus became the dominant European power in North America and India. But like maybe some of you may know, he is also known for losing the American colonies later in the American War of Independence. His reign was marked by many military conflicts, such as the war against revolutionary and Napoleonic France, which he defeated at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. George married Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, whom he met on their wedding day. They had a quite happy marriage, and it is said that George, unlike his grandfather, never took any mistress. George was struck by mental illness later in life and went mad. He most likely suffered from porphyria. George was unable to rule from 1810 onwards, and so his eldest son, George, became Prince Regent. George III died on January 29, 1820, after almost 6 years on the throne. Victoria was the only child to her father, Prince Edward, Duke of Kent. She was born on the 24th of May, 1819, in Kensington Palace. After the death of her father in early 1820, she became the direct heir to the English throne. She became Queen of the United Kingdom at only 18 years old after succeeding her uncle William IV. She led Britain to a time of industrial, political, scientific, and military change. The inexperienced young Victoria relied mostly on the then Prime Minister Lord Melbourne, which she saw as father figure. Victoria married her first cousin Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Together they had 9 children. It is believed that Victoria suffered from postnatal depression. Albert died in 1860 and Victoria mourned for the rest of her life, only wearing black. She had great success with marrying off her children to other European royal houses, thus giving her the nickname Grandmother of Europe. Victoria died in January 1901 at the age of 81, with her son and successor Edward VII and her grandson Emperor Wilhelm II at her deathbed. She was laid to rest with a white dress and her wedding veil. You already know who's first on this list, the current Queen of the United Kingdom, Queen Elizabeth II. Elizabeth Alexandra Mary was born on April 21, 1926. At the time of her birth, she was third in line to the British throne, behind her father, Albert, Duke of York, and her uncle, Edward, Prince of Wales. She became direct heir to the throne when her uncle abdicated in 1936 and her father became George VI. She married her third cousin Prince Philip in 1947. Together they have 4 children. Her eldest son, Charles, is the longest-serving heir apparent in British history. George VI died suddenly in February 1952 while Elizabeth was on tour in Kenya, and at the age of 25, she became the next Queen of England. During her reign, she saw an acceleration in the decolonization of Africa and the Caribbean. Over 20 countries gained their independence from Britain. 1992 became her darkest year yet, with her son Andrew separating and her daughter Anne divorcing from her husband. Also, Mauritius removed Elizabeth as head of state, and while visiting Germany later that year, eggs were thrown at her. In November 1992, a large fire broke out in Windsor Castle, and by December she was in a lawsuit against the Sun newspaper. And lastly, news were dropped that her son Charles had separated from his wife Diana. Nevertheless, the Queen kept on ruling, surpassing her Golden Jubilee in 2002 and her Diamond Jubilee in 2012, and can today also celebrate her Platinum Jubilee. If she is still on the throne on May 27, 2024, she will surpass Louis XIV of France as the longest reigning monarch of a sovereign state in world-verified history. These were the top 5 longest reigning monarchs in British history. I hope to see you again next week at Back to History.